Lewis had always dreamed of having a beautiful pool in his backyard, a place where he could unwind after a busy day. Finally, that dream had become a reality. His house, nestled in a quiet suburban neighborhood, was a peaceful escape from the hustle and bustle of daily life. The pool was his pride and joy, shimmering like a blue oasis under the sun, surrounded by neatly trimmed hedges and colorful flowers. He had worked hard for everything he owned, from his job to the little luxuries he allowed himself, and his pool was no exception. Every morning, Lewis took a moment to admire his backyard, feeling proud of what he had built. The water sparkled like a diamond, and the tranquility of the yard gave him a sense of peace. After long hours at work, there was nothing better than coming home, diving into the cool water, and letting the stresses of the day melt away. But for Lewis, that calm didn't always last. His seemingly ideal neighborhood came with its own set of challenges, one of them being a woman named Karen. She lived just a few houses down and had a reputation for making rude, uncomfortable comments to anyone she deemed different. Lewis had learned to ignore Karen's hurtful words, brushing them off as nothing more than the ignorance of a bitter person. He was patient and didn't want to cause drama, but there was one thing Lewis would not tolerate: someone disrespecting his space. And that's exactly what happened one hot summer afternoon. It was a Saturday, and Lewis had just wrapped up a long, exhausting week at work. He was looking forward to a relaxing swim, a moment of peace in the sanctuary he had built for himself. However, as he stepped into his backyard, he froze. There, sitting at the edge of his pool, was Karen. She was lounging in one of his chairs, soaking up the sun, acting as though she had every right to be there. She didn't even seem to notice him at first, too absorbed in her own world of relaxation. But when she finally glanced up and saw him standing there, her expression barely changed. If anything, she looked like she was daring him to say something. "Whoa, it's about time you showed up," Karen said with a sneer. "I was waiting for you to get out of the way so I could use this." Lewis's eyes narrowed. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. His pool, which he had paid for and maintained with his own hands, was now being claimed by someone who had no right to it. But Karen wasn't just being rude. She was taking it a step further. She leaned back comfortably, completely unfazed. "You know," she added, "you people never know how to take care of nice things. It's a surprise you even have a pool. People like you don't deserve them." Lewis's chest tightened at her words. His hands curled into fists, but he forced himself to stay calm. He had heard racist comments from Karen before, but this was personal. She wasn't just insulting him. She was trying to strip him of his dignity. "I don't think you should be here," Lewis said, keeping his voice steady. "This is my property, and I didn't invite you to use my pool." Karen scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "Oh, please. You think you deserve this? Pools are for people who work hard, people who actually belong in places like this." The words cut deep, but Lewis refused to give her the satisfaction of seeing him lose his composure. He had dealt with people like Karen before. People who thought they were superior, people who used their privilege to belittle others. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay level-headed. "You need to leave my property," he said, his voice calm but firm. Karen's smirk widened. "And if I don't? And what are you going to do, call the cops?" She let out a mocking laugh. "You people always think you can get away with anything. Don't you know your place?" Lewis's heart pounded in his chest. He had heard enough. He wasn't going to stand there and let Karen spew her hatred at him, not in his own backyard. But he also knew he couldn't let his emotions take control. "Listen," he said, his patience wearing thin. "I'm asking you one last time to leave. You don't belong here." Karen crossed her arms defiantly. "You think you're in charge just because you have a pool? You don't own this neighborhood. People like me don't have to take orders from people like you." Lewis clenched his jaw, struggling to contain his anger. He had spent his entire life proving himself, working twice as hard to earn what others took for granted. He had built his life through sweat and perseverance, and he wasn't going to let someone like Karen make him feel small in his own home. For days, Karen had been trespassing, using his pool without permission, and throwing insults at him every chance she got. Each time he tried to reason with her, she brushed him off, acting like she had every right to invade his space. Lewis had done his best to stay calm, to de-escalate the situation, but after hearing her cruel words yet again, something inside him snapped. It wasn't just the insults. It was the entitlement. The way she acted like she could walk all over him without any consequences. Lewis had worked too hard for his home, his pool, his life, and he wasn't about to let anyone take that from him. Every time Karen spoke, it felt like a jab to the gut. But the last comment, the one about people like him not deserving a pool, was the one that made him realize something important. Karen wasn't going to stop until she faced real consequences. Lewis could have called the police, but he knew that wouldn't solve anything. He didn't want a shouting match, and he didn't want the whole neighborhood to witness a dramatic scene. No, he would handle this differently. He would handle it his way. Lewis took a deep breath, steadying himself. Karen was still lounging by his pool, acting as though she had every right to be there. He had given her multiple warnings, but she clearly wasn't going to listen. He knew people like her, they thrived on confrontation, on pushing boundaries just to see how much they could get away with. But Lewis wasn't about to let her win. "Karen," he said, his voice measured but firm. "I'm not going to argue with you anymore. You need to leave now, or I'll make sure this never happens again." She rolled her eyes, stretching her arms above her head like she had all the time in the world. "Oh, relax, it's just a pool. I don't see why you're making such a big deal out of this." Lewis crossed his arms. "'Cause it's my pool. You weren't invited, and you have no right to be here." Karen smirked. "So what are you going to do about it? Call the cops? You think they'll listen to you over me?" The blatant arrogance in her tone made Lewis's stomach turn. She wasn't just trespassing. She was daring him to react in a way that would make him look like the problem. But Lewis was smarter than that. He wasn't going to let her manipulate the situation. He pulled out his phone. "I don't need to call the cops. I have security cameras all over my property. You've been trespassing multiple times. If you don't leave now, I'll make sure the HOA sees the footage." Karen's smirk faltered for just a moment, but she recovered quickly. "Oh, please. The HOA won't do anything. I've lived here longer than you. I have connections." Lewis didn't take the bait. "Maybe. But I also have a lawyer, and I guarantee you if I file a trespassing complaint, that'll be on your record, not mine." That did it. Karen's expression darkened, her confidence wavering. "You wouldn't." Lewis raised an eyebrow. "Try me." There was a beat of silence, then, with an exaggerated sigh, Karen stood up, grabbing her towel. "You're such a killjoy," she muttered. "I was just trying to have a little fun." Lewis didn't respond. He simply watched as she gathered her things and marched toward the gate, muttering under her breath. As she stepped out, she turned back. "This isn't over. You'll regret this." Lewis didn't flinch. "We'll see." She slammed the gate behind her, and just like that, she was gone. But Lewis knew this wasn't the last he'd hear from her, and next time, he'd be ready. After Karen stormed off, Lewis knew it was only a matter of time before she found another way to stir up trouble. He'd dealt with people like her before, entitled, bitter, and always looking for someone to blame. But he wasn't about to let her continue disrespecting him or his home. That evening, Lewis sat on his porch with a cold drink, watching the sunset over his backyard. The pool reflected the golden hues of the sky, calm and undisturbed, just the way he liked it. But something told him that Karen wasn't done. And he was right. The next morning, Lewis woke to the sound of a loud knock on his front door. When he opened it, he was met with the sight of a man in a suit holding a clipboard. Behind him stood Karen, arms crossed, an all too satisfied smirk on her face. "Good morning," the man said. "I'm David Mitchell from the Brentwood Homeowners Association. I've received a complaint about an unauthorized structure on your property." Lewis's brow furrowed. "Unauthorized structure? What are you talking about?" David flipped through his clipboard. "Your swimming pool. According to HOA records, there's no approval for its construction." Lewis let out a humorless laugh. "That's because the pool was already here when I bought the house." "It's been here for years," Karen interjected, her voice dripping with false concern. "Oh, but how do we know that's true? You could have built it without permission. It's a violation of HOA guidelines." Lewis crossed his arms. "You're really reaching, Karen." David cleared his throat. "Regardless, we'll need proof that the pool was legally constructed, otherwise you could face fines or be required to remove it." Lewis clenched his jaw but forced himself to stay calm. "I'll provide the documents, but this is harassment." Karen feigned innocence. "Harassment? Oh, come on, I'm just making sure the rules are followed." Lewis stared at her for a long moment before nodding. "Fine. Give me 24 hours. That night, Lewis went through his home purchase documents. Sure enough, there it was, the original blueprints and permits for the pool, proving it had been legally installed long before he moved in. With those in hand, he sent a copy to the HOA and made sure to CC Karen on the email. By the next afternoon, David Mitchell was back, looking sheepish. "Mr. Lewis, I reviewed the documents and everything checks out. I apologize for the inconvenience." Lewis smirked. "No problem, but maybe next time you should check records before wasting my time." Karen, who had been watching from her porch, scowled and stormed inside. Another loss for her. A week later, Lewis was finally enjoying a peaceful evening by the pool when he heard splashing. His heart sank. He turned the corner, and there she was. Again. Karen was swimming in his pool as if she hadn't just tried to get it taken away from him. Lewis clenched his fists. Enough was enough. Pulling out his phone, he hit record. "Hey, Karen, enjoying yourself?" She turned, startled, but quickly masked it with another smirk. "It's a public pool now, isn't it?" Lewis laughed. "Nope, still mine. And now, I have evidence of you trespassing." Karen's face paled as she realized what he was doing. "You wouldn't. You try to get my pool taken away. Now you're using it like it's yours? This ends today, Karen." She hesitated, then scoffed. "Fine. This place isn't even that nice anyway." She climbed out of the pool, dripping wet, and stormed off. Lewis watched her go, feeling the weight of the battle finally lift off his shoulders. The next day, he sent the video to the HOA and let them handle the rest. Karen was officially banned from his property, and after multiple complaints from other neighbors, she received warnings for harassment. Lewis finally had his peace. As he lounged by the pool that evening, the water calm and undisturbed, he smiled to himself. Karen had lost. And for once, justice had won.